What would you do if your dog led you to someone who was supposed to be dead? Someone tied to a promise you made years ago. The dog named Crow moved like a shadow across the hot ground, his black streak shining through the dust. He was not the kind of dog who barked without reason. Wade Cridge trusted him more than any man he had met since the war. Crow had survived cattle drives, gunfights, storms, and winters that broke stronger things. So when Crow suddenly stopped and stiffened at the edge of Sundown County, Wade knew something was wrong. The wind shifted. Dust carried a scent Crow did not like. Wade paused mid-drink from his canteen. Crow rarely broke his calm unless danger was close or something needed saving. The dog loped ahead, weaving between cactus shadows and cracked earth. Wade clicked his tongue and urged his mare forward. They rode past an old fence post, a skull tangled in wire, and a boot half buried in sand. The land here was full of things the world had forgotten. Crow stopped at a boulder. Wade slid off his horse and stepped into the dusty shade. At first he thought it was a bundle of cloth. Then he saw a hand, limp and gray, covered in dirt. A woman lay curled in the earth like she had tried to bury herself. Her skin looked pale, like wet ash. Her lips were split. Her hair was tangled and streaked with dried blood. Her dress, once a soft blue, was torn from thorns and storms. It hung from her body like old paper. Wade knelt beside her and placed the back of his hand near her mouth. A thin breath touched his skin. Weak, but still there. Crow whined low, almost like he was urging Wade to hurry. He lifted her head gently and poured a little water across her lips. She swallowed once, then choked as dust lifted from her throat. Her eyes fluttered but did not open. Wade did not waste time. He hoisted her into his saddle and tied her so she would not fall. She weighed almost nothing. A girl hollowed by fear, hunger, or something darker. He mounted behind her and started toward a half-ruined hunting shack hidden behind old cottonwoods. He had not been there since the rains had broken its roof, but it was better than leaving her for vultures. By dusk, they reached the shack. The old door creaked on one hinge. Wade laid her on a cot and tore his own shirt into strips for bandages. He poured whiskey into her wounds. She jerked at the burn but did not wake. He cleaned her feet, picked thorns from her skin, and washed dried blood from her hair. Crow lay beside her cot, head on his paws, watching her breathe. 2 days passed before she opened her eyes. They were green, not washed out, but deep like moss on stone. She looked around in silence. Wade offered water. She drank with shaking hands. "You know where you are?" Wade asked. She parted her lips. "No." He waited. She did not say more. "Name?" he asked. She swallowed hard. "Don't know." Wade frowned. He had seen liars and he had seen broken people. Sometimes they looked the same, but there was something in her voice. Something too flat to be a lie. "You got any mark on you?" he asked. She lifted her wrist. A strange burn shaped like a circle lay there. Not a brand, not an accident, something done on purpose. Wade felt a cold memory strike him. Years ago, he had been promised to a girl through a strange family agreement. He had never met her, only seen her miniature portrait on a letter, sealed with a burn mark shaped just like this one. Her name had been Ruth Vexley. She had disappeared 2 years later, and the marriage had been called off. Wade never thought about her again. Life had taken him places far from promises and old letters. Now this girl with the same mark lay in his shack. She healed slowly over the next days. She barely spoke. She watched everything around her with quiet, sharp eyes. At night, Wade heard her make small, broken sounds, like memories were trying to claw their way back. One morning she asked, "Why did you stop for me?" "Crow found you," he said. She looked at the dog. He stared back. "Why didn't you leave me?" she asked. "Didn't seem right," Wade replied. "You've done wrong things before." He met her eyes without flinching. She nodded like she already knew that. By the 6th day, she could walk. Wade gave her an old shirt and a belt to tie it around her waist. She moved with slow, careful steps. "You need a name," he said. She looked out the window. "I like Ruth." Wade did not react, but something inside him shifted. "Ruth it is," he said. Crow whined softly. She turned toward the dog and said, almost to herself, "I think I was supposed to find you." Wade said nothing. Outside, the wind rose like it knew a storm was coming. That night, Wade caught her trying to strike rocks together with shaking hands, trying to make fire with nothing but will and fear. "Who did it?" he asked. Her eyes turned cold. "They thought I was dead." Wade had seen that kind of survival before, a person walking long after their shadow had quit. She stayed with him through the week, helping him fix the roof, gather wood, boil water. She asked nothing about his past. He asked nothing about her memories. But every night she stared at the burn mark on her wrist, like it held all the answers. Then one night, she stood at the door with Crow beside her. "I want to find them," she said. Wade didn't ask who. She held out her trembling hand. "I need a gun." "You ever shot one?" he asked. "No." He opened a trunk and handed her a revolver, old but strong. She held it with steady fingers, and Wade knew then this wasn't chance. This was the promise he never meant to keep. Ruth learned to shoot with a silent rage that scared even the wind. She did not blink at the recoil. She did not smile when a bullet hit its mark. She trained like someone who had already died once and refused to die again. Wade set up broken bottles, rusted pans, even an old scarecrow. She shattered every target within a week. He said little, only corrected her grip or reminded her to breathe before the trigger broke. She never thanked him. At night, she sat by lamplight and cleaned the revolver piece by piece until it shone like something alive. Crow never left her side. They moved together like they shared one heartbeat. Then, one morning, they found a rider half buried beneath brush. Shot in the back. Horse gone. Buzzards circling. Ruth crouched beside him, lifted his coat, and pulled a small black coin from the inner pocket. A crude mark was carved into it, a circle crossed by a single line. Wade felt his jaw tighten. "Sundown riders," he said. Ruth's face changed. He was one of them. "You remember now?" Wade asked. Her voice dropped. "I remember the one who gave me to them." "Who?" She looked up at him without hesitation. "My father." The words fell heavy in the air. No shake. No tears. Just truth stripped down to bone. Crow growled low. They rode south toward Dust Whip, a town burned down by its own sins. Half the buildings leaned like they were tired of holding secrets. Only the general store had any light in it. Inside stood a gambler in a long coat, hands resting on sacks of flour. Ruth walked straight to the counter and placed the black coin down. "Where's the man who carries these?" she said. The gambler stared at her, then at Wade's rifle. "What's your stake?" he asked. "My name," Ruth answered. Wade stepped forward. "You want to keep your jaw, talk." Fear loosened the man's tongue. He pointed to the back room. "There's a map on the wall. Third camp down the Black Ridge. They stay mobile." "They expecting company?" Wade asked. "They don't expect anything," the gambler said. "They just wait." The camp sat at the end of a narrow trail through dead trees and old iron stakes left from some lost mine. Ruth walked ahead, steady and sure. Wade hung back with the rifle ready. Crow stayed between them. The first sentry fell with one clean shot through the eye. Ruth didn't slow. The second died in his sleep, throat cut with no sound. By the time they reached the center of camp, 6 men sat around the fire, weapons slung close. 2 women were chained nearby, barefoot and thin as shadows. Ruth stepped into the firelight. The men rose. She drew first. 2 dropped before the others even reached their guns. 1 ran toward the wagon. Wade shot him in the back. Another sprinted toward the rocks. Crow leapt and dragged him down. Only 1 man remained. He staggered forward, hands raised. "Ruth," he breathed. "Ruth Vexley." Ruth froze. Wade watched her hand tremble around the gun. "You know him?" Wade asked. She nodded once. "He was the one who told me I'd be better off this way." The man swallowed. "Your father made the deal." "I know," she said. He smiled crooked. "Your father's rich now, sold the land, took your name right off the records. Girl, you died 2 winters ago. You're a ghost." Ruth shot him in the knee. He collapsed, screaming. "I lived," she said. Then she shot him in the heart. They freed the women, buried the dead, and burned the camp until the flames reached the sky. Ruth stood alone in the glow, her face hard to read. Wade didn't push. He knew revenge could quiet the past, but it never killed it. She turned to him. "I need to find him." "Where?" "St. Ellison," she said. "That's where land papers go. That's where lies live." "Then we ride," Wade said. They reached St. Ellison by moonlight. The town pretended to be civilized, but smelled of bribes and old sins. Ruth walked straight to the courthouse and shot the lock off. Inside, she tore through drawers until she found the ledger. Her family land, sold, transferred, signed by Matthias Templeton, marked with a seal Wade recognized from old wartime families. And in the margin, a note. "Property cleared. Heir deceased." Ruth stared at the words until her knuckles turned white. Then, she ripped the paper down the middle. There was no going back now. They followed the names through the night. Bank manager, land broker, church official. All roads led to 2 men, Matthias Templeton and Clive Doran. Doran ran a brothel behind the tracks. Ruth found the door by instinct alone. A young girl answered, barely 15. "I'm looking for Clive," Ruth said. "He don't take visits. Tell him it's Vexley's daughter." Fear flickered in the girl's eyes. She disappeared inside. Minutes later, Clive Doran appeared, tall, sharp, too clean for the kind of dirt he dealt in. "Vexley's daughter," he said. "Didn't expect you to be walking." Ruth's voice was low. "You opened the gate the night they dragged me away." He smirked. "Memories twist easy." Crow growled. Doran reached for his belt. Wade fired first, hitting Doran's wrist. The gun fell. Doran screamed. Ruth slammed the revolver into his knee. He collapsed. "You're taking me to Templeton," she said. "Now." They dragged Doran to the mansion near the West Ridge. Templeton himself answered the door. His hair was white, his face folded with guilt. "You were a child," he said. "It was business." "I'm not a child now," Ruth replied. Templeton stepped forward. "If I'd known what you'd become, I'd have killed you myself." Ruth raised the revolver and shot him through the eye. The mansion caught fire behind them as they walked away. Flames chased the sky. Back at the sycamores, Ruth sat with her back to the tree, soot and ash clinging to her face. "You could leave," she said quietly. "Go back to your life." Wade shook his head. She looked at him deeply. "I think you were meant to find me," she said. "Crow found you," Wade replied. They did not speak again as the night settled around them. But something had changed. The past was burning behind them, and the future was moving like a storm ahead. Spring came with dust, thunder, and rain that carved deep scars into the land. Ruth rode through storms without fear, her coat whipping behind her like a flag of war. On quiet nights, Wade watched her sit by the fire, staring at the burn mark on her wrist as if it was pointing her somewhere she had not reached yet. Crow stayed close to her heels. Elsie slept against Wade's saddle or beside Ruth with her ribbon tied neatly in her hair. The world had changed for the girl. She no longer flinched at footsteps or shadows. She carried a knife at her belt and moved with quiet confidence. They traveled across small forgotten towns, burned chapels, collapsed barns, abandoned stage stops. Elsie learned fast. She watched Ruth track footprints, watched Wade take apart rifles, watched Crow sense danger before any of them did. She never cried, not even when fever struck 2 days out of Grayer's Bluff. They hid in a root cellar while Ruth laid cold cloths across her forehead. Crow guarded the entrance, ears twitching at every sound. On the 3rd morning, Elsie opened her eyes and whispered, "I dreamed I had wings, but I flew into the ground." Ruth smoothed her hair. "You're not going to break." Later, Wade stood at the door of the root cellar. He had carried and buried too many like Elsie in the past. But this one, he knew Ruth would never lose. They reached Hollow Creek in late July. A small town. Quiet. Mostly farmers and gravediggers. The preacher had one eye, and married couples for bread, but buried them for whiskey. Ruth asked him for a shovel, not for digging a grave, but for digging up a box buried under a dead oak 2 miles north. Inside the box was a sealed pouch and a letter. Wade had buried them after the war. Ruth opened the letter. Inside was proof of the promise, that she had once been promised to Wade Cridge through a deal between their families. Signed by her father. Wade took the letter, looked at it once, and dropped it straight into the fire. "I don't want a promise from a man who sold his own daughter," he said. Ruth looked down at her wrist, the burn mark standing out like a scar made of memory. "I don't either." In Hollow Creek, they rented a small cabin. Ruth worked the fields. Wade fixed the roof. Elsie slept on a cot with her new ribbon tied tight. For a time, things were calm. Not peaceful, but steady. But peace does not last long for people built from fire. One night, Crow growled at the door. Wade grabbed his rifle. Ruth stood behind him, steady. A man waited outside, hat soaked from the rain. "My name's Marin," he said. "I saw what you did in Stonewater. My town's got girls missing. Taken same way. No lawman cares. I don't have coin to pay you, but I can bleed beside you." Ruth stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you're with us." The war didn't end. It only moved. A year passed. Ruth rode less, but trained Elsie like the world depended on her. How to track, how to steady her breath before firing a bullet, how to disappear without losing herself. The girl learned fast. Her fear faded into something sharper. Wade traveled between towns, gathering names, widows, orphans, men who remembered faces that needed justice. They left messages in tree hollows, under stones, tied in pieces of twine. A quiet army grew from the forgotten. They called themselves the Ashmark, named for the scar on Ruth's wrist, for what had burned and could not be rebuilt. One evening, Ruth stood at the edge of a wheat field as the sky turned blood orange. Crow sat beside her, muzzle now graying with age. Elsie picked flowers near the fence, her ribbon shining yellow in the dying light. Wade leaned on the porch rail, watching all of them. "You ever wonder," Ruth said, "what would have happened if I stayed dead?" Wade didn't answer right away. "No." She turned to him. "Why not?" "Because you didn't stay dead," he said, "and everything after that is yours." Ruth looked toward Elsie. The girl bent to tie her ribbon back into her hair, careful and calm. "No," Ruth whispered, "it's hers now." The wind moved through the wheat like a slow breath. Ruth lifted her hand. Crow followed. Elsie looked up and smiled, small but real, like someone who had climbed out of darkness and found a world worth staying in. Wade stepped off the porch and joined them. The land around them was still broken. The past was still heavy, but the people walking it had changed. And that was enough. Ruth Vexley did not look back. She had walked through death, through fire, through every lie her father had sold. She had found the child she lost, built a new family from dust, and carved justice into the land with her own hands. And somewhere deep inside her chest, where fear once lived, something softer began to grow. Not peace, not surrender, but the beginning of a life she got to choose.